fill the MCG or Amy Park, you're filling stadiums with people who at some point in their life will have some connection to a grassroots level of sport. You know, the sporting fans don't come from nowhere. The elite doesn't come from nothing.
Yeah.
For me, knowing who's in what position, even if it's not in my field, so not marketing, PR, I think is really strong, because even having someone in a high performance position or club development or IT, you have a contact in at that organization and they know you from previous roles or they know you from some kind of professional capacity. Having a voice inside an organization who can even just mention your name to the hiring manager is more powerful than I think people realize.
Hello and welcome to the Sports Grad Podcast, the ultimate guide to make it in the sports industry. I am your host, Nathan Peroni, and on this podcast, I chat with people in industry to find out how they got hired into dream jobs in sport. If you want to know what people are doing to break in and grow their career, make sure to follow the pod and subscribe to our newsletter for even more advice. Or if you want to give yourself a competitive advantage in the job market and put your career on a rapid new trajectory, go to our website and apply for the next cohort of the Sports Grad Method program. Here at Sports Grad, we've helped people land 851 jobs in sport, with today's shout out to Jake Creech, who recently joined Hockey Victoria as the Marketing and Communications Manager. After searching for 3 years and 10 failed interview processes, Jake joined our Method program and succeeded in his first interview process. So congrats again, Jake, and well done. Now, coming up on today's show is Sarah Dyce, Public Affairs and Marketing Manager at the Victorian Institute of Sport. Sarah's career in sport has taken her around the world with so many incredible experiences, which started with an initial move from Perth to Melbourne for greater opportunities to work in sport. Through her diverse roles surrounding sports media, PR and comms, Sarah has had opportunities to be at Tokyo and Paris Olympics, Australian Open, Swimming World Championships, A-League Finals Series, Invictus Games and World University Games in Berlin. Sarah knows what it takes to excel in media relations, content strategy and fan engagement, so grab a pen and enjoy this chat with Sarah.
Hey guys, Ruben Williams here, founder of SportsGrad. We'll be back to the episode in just a second, but I just wanted to take a moment to tell you about the SportsGrad Method program, which has been helping people land jobs at major sporting bodies in as little as 14 days and doesn't require you to take out a massive debt to get started. If you are looking to make a jump into the sports industry, but nothing seems to be working for you right now, then why not apply for the SportsGrad Method program? Inside, you'll get given a proven playbook and a one-on-one industry mentor, as well as access to the SportsGrad network, plus much, much more, all of which have helped people land over 800 roles in sport. If you're ready to back yourself and fully go after your career and not let life get away from you and wonder, what if I'd only given that a shot? Then you're the kind of person who we'd love to work with. So head to sportsgrad.com.au/program and you can apply to join us.
Sarah Dyce, welcome to the Sports Grad Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. I want to give context to how we met back at Western United, 2022, I think it was.
Yeah, I think it was the 2022-2023 season. Yeah. I came on as a media manager as a maternity cover role and kind of slot in just as the women were starting up, I think. It was their first...
Yeah, that sounds about right, actually.
Yeah, it was the women's first season.
Yeah.
But I also came in, and I'm fairly confident the men were already underway because it was at the post of the World Cup.
I think it was we were in finals that year as well.
Yeah. So it was a bit of a roller coaster coming in, and you guys had just won the year before you'd won the title. Yeah. And I came in not knowing a ton about football. Now I definitely am more confident in it, but at the time I didn't know a ton about football, only what people had told me, or my partner's football mad. So he was more excited, I think, than I was when I got the job. And you've been through
a lot ever since. A lot of opportunities, a lot of cool experiences. Obviously, now at the VIS, I saw you at trackside with Gout recently at Lakeside as well.
Yeah, a very cool opportunity. I mean, it was right in our backyard in terms of the VIS is right next to Lakeside Stadium. So we reached out to Athletics Australia and said, basically, we're here. We know the venue. We know a lot of the athletes because a lot of the athletes were VIS athletes, and we wanted to lend a hand. And it is one of those moments it was one of the first times I've had when I knew nearly everyone on the media or comms team from a different event. Yeah, okay. So that was really cool to get to work with people who I'd worked with internationally or I hadn't worked with in a while, and then get to bring my team as well along for their first ever event. So that was a really cool experience. But Yeah, I don't think I have had many mixed zones like gout. There is a photo that exists somewhere of me, and you can just make out this tiny little blob of an arm with my hand holding the mic, because I had to take the mic for ABC because they couldn't get in close enough.
Yeah.
And I'm ducked underneath, and there's people with arms everywhere, and it was fairly squishy. Pretty
And it was a
chaotic.
cold, wet night, I think, as well.
Yeah, and I don't think that helped anything. But yeah, it was a lot of fun, and he's a character. He's a great interview. And thankfully, there were people around me who knew a lot more about athletics and could ask more nuanced questions, as opposed to the stock standard. So how'd that feel? Which is something I really try and avoid.
That's all right. And accreditation-wise,
Yes.
you've got an amazing amount here. Obviously, we're only going to pin one up, but
Yeah.
do you want to just talk about some of the creds you've brought with us?
Sure. This is my World University Games accreditation with many pins from Berlin in 2025. So I was deputy venue media manager there in Berlin, which was a really cool opportunity. The fact I didn't speak German probably didn't help a lot, but thankfully everyone was really understanding and flipped to English.
Duolingo come in handy?
You know what? I was on French at the time, so no.
Okay.
But most people, Berlin is very, very English orientated, which is great.
Yeah.
I've got Invictus Games, also from Germany, Düsseldorf in 2023, which I was there with Invictus Australia, and doing more of a comms role for that one.
Yeah.
And then I've got my Paris accred, once again, all of my lovely pins from collecting. I've got my Paris accred from when I was with the Australian Olympic Committee as part of their Main Press Centre team. So
Love it. And so with all the pins, I know we sort of spoke off air before we jumped on, but is a lot of the pins, and I think it adds to the memories as well, but is that things that you've purchased or people have donated or given to you? Or
there's a couple that you get given as part of like the team, as part of the team when you start, particularly for Paris and for Invictus, we got given pins that had either the Australian flag or I think I have a couple on my Paris one that have a bit of like the First Nations kind of artwork worked into them. Say Australia, Paris 2024.
awesome. Yeah.
But I wasn't even aware that the pins was such a big deal in terms of exchanging them until Invictus in 2023. Okay. And I was given a ton of pins by Invictus Australia, and I just was every second or third person you spoke to when they realised you were from a different country would ask to trade pins. So there's definitely more demand than there is supply when you go to an international event for pins. But it's this really nice thing, and as you say, it's a really nice memory of being able to look at the pins. And I remember a lot of them and how I got them and the people who gave them to me. So for Paris was a little bit more chaotic, so I don't fully remember where every single one of them came from, but I managed to collect some pretty unique countries along the way. So
you got Canada on there.
I got Canada, that's Japan.
Yeah.
I worked with NBC, so I got that.
Serbia.
Yep. Team GB. Then I think I also lost.
Is that Nepal as well?
Yeah, I think it is. I didn't want to make that call without confidence.
The only flag that's not square.
Yeah, and then I've got
for those playing at home.
Got my Team USA, my little French pin with the mascot.
Yeah, that's all so cool.
Yeah, but then I think for Berlin, I got tons of. They came directly from the people I was working with in either my team as volunteers, or they came from media managers or media officials from the other teams on the sports I was working with. So I did a lot of work with Brazil, France, and Philippines. So they gave me pins on the last day of competition, which was really nice.
Love it.
Yeah, so it's a nice memory to have and to look back on.
Yeah, the beauty of global events and then the chance to connect with all these people that you just wouldn't meet otherwise. Yeah, I love it. Now, we start the conversation with quick-fire questions to get to know you a little bit better and set the foundations for the conversation. So firstly, what inspired you to work in sport?
We've definitely had this conversation over our duration of knowing each other. I never wanted to work in sport. I didn't set out with the goal of working in sport. I just knew I really didn't want a 9-to-5 or something that felt a bit more static. I wanted a bit of diversity and something that really I felt really excited about. And I was incredibly fortunate, right place, right time kind of thing, that lined up with a role in sport when I did move to Melbourne from Perth. And I think probably before I started working officially there, when I still was an intern, I think I'd done probably 2 or 3 weeks, and I just absolutely knew, like, this is it. This is what I'm going to do with my career, kind of thing. So,
Yeah, very good. Love it. First ever job, and then a first ever sport-related job?
It was a bakery stall at the Subi markets in Perth, and I was working in a gluten-free bakery stall selling like sausage rolls, pies, and stuff like that. This is very
how early is that?
In my life.
No, as in as like a time bakery store to market. I imagine that's an early start.
It's at 6 a.m.
Yeah, okay.
It's at 6 a.m., which is a lot to ask when you're 13, 14 kind of thing. But no, it was good experience. It was customer service.
Yeah.
And then first ever sport-related job was the Swimming Australia role. Yeah.
Very good. After high school, did you do any extra study?
Went to university, the University of Notre Dame in Perth, and I did my Bachelor's of Marketing and Public Relations there. It's a 3-year degree, and they essentially cram in as many units as possible into 3 years. But at the same time, you get a really great grasp of all the different options that exist within the industries.
Fantastic. And one interview question you were asked to answer for the job you're in, or one question you like to ask people that you hire?
I think they're kind of the same vein. I remember specifically being asked about the type of culture that I wanted to be a part of, or the type of culture that I like to work in. And I think those are very common kind of questions across a lot of industries. There's always some form of culture question.
Of course, yeah.
And I remember even now talking about it with my manager who hired me around how I answered it. He said was something that stood out to him around I could really articulate why I wanted to work in sport, but also the type of workplace I wanted to be in outside of that. So not just sport's amazing and it's exciting and it brings a lot of cool opportunities, but more I wanted to be excited to show up to the office. I never wanted to dread a Monday. And for me, that's people who are really open about, open to new opportunities, but also collaborative, happy to chip in. They're not the people who it hits 5 o'clock exactly and they're clocking out.
Yeah.
They're the ones who ask if you need a hand or offer a different perspective kind of thing. So that being able to articulate that probably better in the interview than right now.
That's definitely relatable though.
Was something that stood out to him, and something I ask a lot of people, specifically we've just done a bit of a hiring process through the VIS, and something I ask across all my interviews is what do you think is the most important part of sport? And there's no right or wrong answer for me personally, but the way someone answers it tells me a lot about them. I think when people come in and they say high profile athlete names or, Olympics, Paralympics, and go for the really bright, shiny, elite, high performance aims, but there's no mention in there of coaches, support staff, grassroots. For me, that's really telling about how someone prioritizes their work, particularly in an industry where we do work across grassroots all the way up to elite.
For sure.
The elite doesn't exist without the grassroots. So if in selling yourself to me in an interview, you can't acknowledge that, or it's not necessarily what pops to mind, that's really telling for me.
That's interesting. I saw when you sent the answers through and I read that, I was like, that's probably something I haven't thought about as a question I would expect or how I would think to answer. But you're right, like the game development, the grassroots that's where we all come from as a player, as a coach, as an administrator. Yeah. And that if you don't have the understanding of the flow and effects, like these are the people that are still going to turn up and support. And if you don't have a good positive impact on them. You
fill the MCG or Amy Park, you're filling stadiums with people who at some point in their life will have some connection to a grassroots level of sport. The sporting fans don't come from nowhere. The elite doesn't come from nothing.
Yeah.
Not being able to, I guess, acknowledge that or have an understanding is, it's really telling to me. So
like it.
I normally ask.
Good one to keep an eye out for if you go to the VIS. A book or podcast recommendation that's helped your career?
Not necessarily anything, I guess, industry related. I more really angle for things that help my brain switch off. Mm-hmm. So for me, media, content, social media, it's very full on and it's a lot of noise and it's a lot of different things to take in. For me, being able to switch my brain off with an audiobook or like a nostalgic kind of album or something like that is the best way that I can progress my career, because it helps my brain reset and kind of take it back to square one and reprioritize. Or sometimes when it's, like an audiobook or an old 90s, noughties kind of pop album, it just kind of helps my brain think differently about the song and like what they're talking about and how potentially those pop culture moments can influence the work we do.
Yeah, no, I like it. And we had Rachel Lynch on the last podcast and I spoke to her, and it was like a lot of things around well-being, athlete well-being, personal well-being, mental health.
Yeah.
I think it sometimes gets overlooked that, yes, it's not fully book and podcast recommendation for a sport per se, but if it helps you perform at a better level, then it's a good thing for you. And the last one, quick fire wise, is if you could try another job in sport for a day, what would it be?
I really would love to try work in sport development. I think when I say that, I really want to work in an organisation or do a kind of project that goes to a different country that may not have as strong systems that Australia has set up for grassroots through to high performance, and kind of really get in there and figure out what matters to that culture and those people and help build something up that they can be really proud of. So for me, I really want to do a lot of work in the Pacific Island region because I've been there on holiday. I've worked with athletes from that region, and they're just some of the nicest, best people. They're so proud of their culture and they're so invested in so many sports. I really want to be a part of helping them get to, an Olympics or a Paralympics with that sport and just growing the participation base in their country through it.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. And I want to take you all the way back now to the move from Melbourne from Perth.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned the first role is a marketing intern at Swimming Australia, but I guess why did you make the move? And we hear a lot of people that do it, move from interstate into Melbourne. But yeah, why did you make the move and what was the challenges?
I have to preface, it was 2018 at the time when I say why I moved. I just didn't want to work in oil and gas.
Okay.
And I'm very aware there's a lot more happening in Perth now than just the oil and gas industry.
Yeah.
But at the time when I graduated, it was all jobs with big mining companies and FIFO kind of work. Even in a marketing and comms sense, they were looking for people to go do that kind of stuff. And back to, I just never wanted a 9 to 5. I knew there had to be more opportunities out there for me. And I'd lived in Perth my whole life, so I just wanted to change. So I figured Melbourne was it.
And how did you come across the Swimming Australia marketing intern role?
I found it actually on I'm going to say a lesser known, potentially, recruitment site.
Yeah.
Not a Seek or a Sports People or anything like that. It was on Pedestrian TV.
I haven't heard of that.
Well, there you go. Yeah. It's more, in my experience, it's more for like arts, theatre, film kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I just saw an opportunity with Swimming Australia for a marketing intern and threw my hat in the ring, and I guess kind of that's what kickstarted everything.
Yeah, fantastic. And obviously you had, I think, 3-4 months there, and then you became full-time as a comms coordinator.
Yeah.
So what did I suppose you provide, and how did you perform that then they went, yep, here's a full-time opportunity?
I have had time to reflect on it, thankfully, which helps me be a bit more, I guess, articulate and see potentially what they saw when I came in as an intern.
Yeah.
So I was only doing 2 days a week at that point, and it's an unpaid internship. At the time, I was working casually somewhere else while I still was kind of going through the rounds of grad programs and interviews and looking for full-time work. And I just kind of came in and hit the ground running kind of thing. And I can articulate much better now. I think the moment for them when they realised that I had value to offer the business was everyone had gone to lunch and they were doing a website redevelopment at the time. So there's a lot that goes into that. But specifically, they were updating their athlete profiles, and they had all these amazing hero kind of photos of the athletes that you see on like the footy cards and stuff like that. And they needed them cut out from the background. Very stock standard task, I realise. Particularly now with AI, I'm fairly confident it could be done in a much
Time changed a little bit, yeah.
But at the time, I had finished the task they'd assigned me, and so I just had hopped on one of the design computers that was there and started cutting out the graphics. And they came back from lunch and saw me on the Mac. Yeah. And I do remember one or two of them going like, oh, we didn't know you could do that. Like, we didn't know you could use Photoshop as well. I was kind of like, oh, yeah, like, no worries. And kind of just got my head down and got on with it kind of thing. And to your point about how I realized I wanted to work in sport was I was enjoying my 2 to 3 days unpaid more than I was enjoying my paid employment. And that to me was super telling around the kind of environment I wanted to be in. So yeah, I just kind of hit the ground running and delivered a few projects for them. They were leading up to a short course in Melbourne at the time. So, yeah.
Amazing. Well done. And I think, we often speak a lot about like potential and showing and proving yourself in those opportunities that maybe aren't paid. And that's a perfect example. How did that role change, and what did you, I guess, enjoy and learn over the 3 years that you stayed at Swimming Australia?
It definitely changed dramatically. There were quite a few organisation reshuffles over the time, and COVID was a massive learning curve for me, as I'm sure it was for a lot of professionals. But I guess I originally started out doing a lot of just socials, website, very much kind of that was my realm and my remit. But over time, it kind of developed when they saw what I could do or what I wanted to learn about. It became a lot more like app development and app design, and working on, being more of a producer on those long form pieces that exist around athlete storytelling. So graphics, what else did I do? I can't remember now. Graphics, like writing. I did a lot of work with a lot of different departments that I think people don't necessarily would consider marketing roles.
Fair.
Like I did a lot of work with our integrity officer at the time, working through how do you communicate out these updates to a national integrity policy to your member organisations and your clubs and your grassroots. And swimming is, from memory, still one of the most participated in sports in Australia. That's a lot of people you have to communicate these changes out to, and the changes have come into effect to protect people. So it's important news that needs to be shared. So I did a lot of work with the integrity department on how do we best communicate that out to the members, kind of thing.
Fantastic. And were you there when the Olympics were meant to happen but then didn't happen?
Yeah.
Is that right?
It was a great day.
Because I imagine in a comms role, that probably has a lot of implications as well. I know it has implications on everyone, but...
No, definitely a lot of implications. And at the time, our team was a little bit smaller because we had someone on maternity leave. And I remember one of the first things that happened when I saw it had been delayed was getting on the phone with my manager at the time. And she was so dead set around making sure the comms went to our athletes first, or people who are kind of in the high performance system, they're categorized. So people who have a very strong chance of making that team.
Yeah.
And I know this is felt across all sport. This is not swimming specific. Because of the delayed games, a lot of athletes held on a year from retiring. And that, adding an additional year to something when you're planning on shifting careers or retiring from a professional sporting career, that has a lot of implications on your mental health, your well-being. At the same time, we're still trying to deal with how to tackle a pandemic and a virus that's spreading around the world. So physical health and safety was a huge component of it as well.
Yeah.
But I think being able to have a really strong sounding board with my manager at the time and my team, who were all incredibly supportive and really understood that I had, on top of dealing with national comms for an Olympic and Paralympic Games getting delayed, I also was going through a very personal struggle in that the hard border had shut for WA, so I couldn't get back to my family. And at the time, that also meant I couldn't get to my partner. So I was kind of alone by myself in Melbourne, as I know a lot of people were, trying to navigate delivering on something that is really important for my career, but also really important for athletes and everyone around the nation to know about in terms of what does a delay look like for a high-performance program or for swimming, which is one of our most successful Olympic sports and Paralympic sports. At the same time, how do you find that balance and manage delivering on really important comms that need to be correct, which is also really difficult when the government advice was changing and every state had different advice at the time. How do you communicate all of that whilst trying to, I guess, protect your own well-being?
Sure. A challenging time, and one that I guess you would have learned a lot that's helped you in these many roles since. Now, that's your one of the last permanent full-time roles you've had, and this then starts a flow-on of contract roles. So the first contract role you then take from that is marketing comms lead at Triathlon Australia. Now, why did you decide to choose contract work as your next step, and what did you face, I guess, going into your first 6 months of what the unknown can be with these opportunities at the end of that?
I think for me, I loved my role at swimming, and the only reason I left was there was no career progression for me at the time. It was, as I said, it was COVID times. There was a lot of uncertainty, particularly around sport, when we couldn't be delivering mass events. So there was a lot of uncertainty around those kind of jobs. And I knew if I wanted to get where I want my career to end up going and the roles I kind of want to find myself in one day, I knew I had to go out and get more experience. So for me, that meant taking different opportunities and taking contracts and shorter term work where I can really go in, learn as much as possible and hone my skills and get the job done, and then move on to another project.
Yeah.
So in terms of the uncertainty, I am very familiar with the uncertainty that comes with freelance and contract life. But at the same time, if you are financially able to and you have a really strong support system in place, I'd highly recommend going the contract route, because I don't think I would have gotten my spot on the Paris team, and I don't think I would be where I am at the VIS if I hadn't put myself out there and gotten those contract opportunities.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. And I think I see all your posts and the experiences you've had and like the accreditations. It's like you take that risk and you're open to the idea of continuing to work hard to work through it all. And then you have all these amazing opportunities. Like, I think it's awesome. Beyond the triathlon role, obviously it leads to continuous work and obviously where we met, but there's contracts across in and out of sport, HESTA, Department of Education, Western United, Invictus Australia. How different did all these roles look, and what I suppose firstly was like the value on going in and out of sport at that time? I imagine there's a lot of things you learn from businesses out of sport that you can still take back into sport as well.
Yes, very much.
Yeah.
I think in terms of the roles, everything was still within the realm of comms, marketing, content. So it all still had that line of storytelling to it. The audiences just changed. So for something like the Department of Education, it was my first time working in government. And for me, that was a massive learning curve. Coming from high performance sport, where things tend to move a little bit quicker than government, that was a massive, massive learning curve in terms of the audience I had to be communicating with. And specifically for the role I was with for Department of Ed, we were working on the Free Kinder initiative, which is free kindergarten for 3 to 4 year olds across Victoria. And at the time, in my mind, I'm used to reporting into a CEO. In my mind, automatically, I was like, cool, I report into the Minister of Education. Like, that's the progression, not knowing enough about government, obviously. Whereas coming in and realizing, no, the key people I actually need to be communicating with are more internal to the industry. So the teachers, the universities, and my team specifically within the Free Kinder initiative, learning to quickly identify who the stakeholders actually are as opposed to who they might be perceived to be when there is that initial getting started in a contract.
Yeah.
That is transferable across everything. So it's similar work and the players change, but the tactics to identify them and build up your rapport and relationship with them doesn't necessarily alter that much.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point. We get a lot of people that want to career pivot, even if their background is purely in government. It's like, how can I actually transfer my skills and my experience into sport? And I know you've only done this for periods of time and you're in sport, but it shows that the audience changes, but the role is very much the same. And I'm sure that applies for lots of different jobs in industry as well. It's not just media.
Would definitely say anyone from government wanting to come into sport, be prepared for the timelines to move a ton quicker and get your approval processes in place. Because I went from, being one of the only people to look at a social media post or a media release before going out to the masses, to having probably 3 or 4 lines of approval before it even got sent up to the minister. And even then, it would still not always get out or make it to the public domain for a couple of months. So
different stages and different businesses, that's for sure. I guess what were some of your key learnings, if you had to put it down to maybe 2 or 3, across those multitude of businesses that we were just spoken about over that period of time?
I definitely think keep objective. They have hired you, or the reason they're coming for a contract role, it could be financial, it could be headcount, it could be a million reasons that you'll never fully know, but stay objective and come in as a third party, because you don't have the same emotional connection to the staff or to the work to alter your the output, I guess. A lot of the times people are really emotionally attached to the work, which is wonderful because it means you care, but it does mean sometimes you're not doing what's in the best interest of the project or the organisation. So being able to come in as a third party, identify the key players, figure out what they want, and then think about what they actually want. So sometimes I would find coming into a contract, people would say, I want this, I want this, I want X, Y, Z. Or stock standard, we want to grow our followers. Very classic example. when you look at the picture holistically and you look at it more from a third-party perspective, yes, everyone wants to grow their followers. Why do you want to grow your followers? Why is there such a need for one specific area to grow over another? Why are we doing this now? What's stemming from it? And having a better understanding of why your key stakeholders are asking those questions lets you, one, address the concerns internally and deliver really strong work, but also you can pivot sometimes and say, I understand that's the outcome you want. We actually need to do something different to achieve that. And sometimes when you've got a lot of internal people who've been working on a project for a long time, they are so in the bubble that they don't necessarily see that.
Yeah.
And there's no right or wrong with it. It's just, I think, keeping objective is probably one of the strongest plays you can make as a contractor coming in. You do have to hit the ground running. And I think I've witnessed this across a couple of different colleagues in the industry who flipped from perm to contract or freelancer and found it a difficult transition because contracts just demand, by nature, they demand a lot more from you mentally and physically. They are a set time period, you're there to do a job. So I think being able to identify the gap really quickly is probably the strongest play. My partner is also a contractor, so it was very helpful to speak to him before I made the switch. So I'd say find someone who has previously been a contractor or done freelance and lived in the uncertainty and get their advice and ask them what their experience is. It doesn't matter if it was in sport or government or corporate. Contracts by nature are very similar. So something my partner has told me repeatedly over my many contracts is they are clearly going to market and they're hiring because there's a gap. Find out what the gap is and how you can fill it.
Yeah, yeah. And did you find it, challenging that every 4 or 5 months you're then looking to, okay, I got to find my next role? And I know we often speak in sports like the connections, and that's the biggest thing, and it helps you so much. But you went like this whole time without really having a time off, which I think is credit to you, because I would think and fear in a contract position, if I was doing it, that there's those periods of months or maybe years for some people that you can't find work. So how did you manage to continue to go one to the other and not have any gaps in between?
I think the government experience has really played into my position since. So don't be afraid to look at other industries or other roles, I'd say is one of the things to keep in mind when you do make that flip, I guess, from perm to contract. Because having even a vague understanding of how the state, federal, but also corporations, insurance, banking, how these different industries operate, they're industries that touch millions of people, and those millions of people are sports fans. So it's about finding how they communicate to their members, their stakeholders, the general public, and finding the way that it can benefit the way you approach a marketing or comms plan kind of thing. I will say with the uncertainty that comes with contract life, it's very real, and don't be afraid to name it, because it does take a really big toll on your mental health. And that's something I didn't fully realize was happening until I was in the permanent position I'm in now. And my manager and I now do joke, how good's perm life? Which is a very privileged position to be in, to say that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he saw, I think, that I was quite burnt out from contract life, and he knew that I would thrive in a permanent position. So being able to name what the issues are with contracting is, I think, really powerful, and I think it gives you a lot of control as a potential employee coming in. To answer your question more eloquently, something I've really worked on with keeping myself employed or in any form of work is always assume that your contract's ending. Always assume that you're coming to an end. You were there to fill a gap. You were there to deliver on a project. It's going to come to an end at some point. Funding runs out, money runs out, games end. You look at local organising committees, they employ hundreds and thousands of people to deliver the games in Milano Cortina. Those people are now out of a job because the organisation no longer exists because the purpose is done. So keeping an eye on roles is something I think is really important, and I do this now in my role at the VIS and perm position, is I keep an eye on who's hiring across the kind of roles in the industries I like to be a part of. So keeping an eye on the NSOs, and are they hiring new digital people? Are they hiring new comms managers? One, it tells me what that sport has identified as a key need for them, or an area that they want to potentially delve into. And it also helps to know, and sport is a bit of who you know moment.
Yeah.
I think it's really helpful to know the movements and how long someone's potentially been in that position, to know for me, and I can give a great example of, I was coming to the end of the Tokyo Games at Swimming Australia, and I was paying attention to the media manager roles and where they were moving, because you get to an end of a 4-year cycle, it's very common for a lot of people to want to try a new sport.
Makes sense.
So I was paying a lot of attention to where the media managers and the comms and content roles were floating around in sport. And for me, that gave an indication of, hey, potentially there's a role for me in 4 years' time. So come end of Paris, if I had been in a different position, I probably would have looked at the media and comms roles across the NSOs, because sport's incredibly fluid. Things just happen, people move. But for me, knowing who's in what position, even if it's not in my field, so not marketing, PR, I think is really strong, because even having someone in a high performance position or club development or IT, you have a contact in at that organization, and they know you from previous roles, or they know you from some kind of professional capacity. Having a voice inside an organization who can even just mention your name to the hiring manager is more powerful than I think people realize.
Yeah, that's great advice, and I think we stand a lot for what that means. So well done as well, I will say. I want to talk Olympics with you. I know you've brought up a little bit along the way. I think that's one of the pinnacles of sport that people would love to be involved in, and obviously in Australia we're fortunate that there's one coming in 2032. You were involved Tokyo 2021, Paris 2024. Most of these surrounding what was MPC stand for? That you said?
Main Press Centre team.
Main Press Centre team. At AOC freelancing. Do you want to just tell us what the average day looked like during your time with the team, pre, post, and during those Olympics?
Yeah. One, I was very grateful and excited to get the opportunity. It was something that I knew was coming about a year out, which really helped in my planning for what jobs I was taking along the way, and jobs I was taking at the time external to the AOC, knowing I had this big event to prepare for. In terms of pre-work, it's not as much as people think in terms of the pre-work required of the freelancers. We probably come in and start delivering on work a month or two out from the games once teams have been selected. So it would be a lot of interviewing potential debutantes, or if there's great stories amongst all of the different sports, we would sit down or Zoom probably. We normally Zoom, have a Zoom call, and would ask questions and kind of get an understanding of their story and their journey into the games. And we would be producing articles and social pieces on that. And then we would send them back to the AOC, and they would take them from there.
Okay.
So doing a lot of work across the different sports was really helpful in preparing. I think as well, and this potentially is an insight for you,
Okay.
is coming into something like a games or a main press centre role. I, at the time, had experience in a couple of sports, but I was by no means an expert the same way other people are in athletics or triathlon even.
For sure, yeah.
I think be really aware of your understanding of the sport itself, not necessarily I will use football as an example. I learned more about football from my time at Western United and through life. I still was not the best person to be writing about football in terms of the analytics, the stats, the scores. I could tell a story and I could tell an athlete's journey to the games, but I was by no means the preferred person, I think, to be writing the more technical pieces.
Sure, yeah.
So leading into the games, you know who's on your team in terms of the main press centre team. We know who's on the team. We know vaguely where they're from and what their background is. You can kind of earmark or pick out the sports you think you're going to get assigned to cover. So for me, I knew going in I'd probably be working on swimming at some point. And I would work on sports climbing because I'd worked on it for Tokyo. So I could do a bit more of a brush up on what's happened since I last checked in.
Yeah.
You know, what's happened, who are the key players, who's making a debut, what are the world records, And in sport climbing, it was a complete flip from Tokyo in that the entire competition format had changed. So learning what impact that has on the scoring and the medal chances and everything like that, being able to earmark and kind of prepare what sports you're going to cover ahead of time is probably in your best interest.
Yeah. How many sports are we talking that for example, you were involved in, or versus someone else? Like, I imagine you're not covering every single sport.
No, I think it was a fairly even split at the end of the day across our team, because we would have people in the main press centre in Paris, but then we would also have people going out to the different venues, and we had people who were working remotely. So we did a lot of work with the guys out in Marseille or even Tahiti for
Yeah, true. There was surfing was out there. Yeah.
Yeah, I did volunteer for that one and sadly did not make the cut to go to Tahiti. But I think it was a very popular pick amongst the team.
Yeah.
But I do have to give a lot of credit to the way that the AOC organised the main press centre team. We had 2 chief of staffs handling everything, and then we had our like kind of overarching guide in Will Jago, who is still with the AOC. And they set it up really, really well, because you put into context, you got 460 athletes across 35 different venues, 33 sports that we were competing in. And you have to make sure that every Australian who is competing, if it's a heat, if it's a semi, it's a final, even if they're not a medal chance per se, you have to make sure that their result is acknowledged and covered across social media and a website kind of component in an article. That's a logistical nightmare to me. But to their credit, the team had it set up really, really well in that they made sure they knew exactly when the Australians were competing and that no one missed out on having some kind of acknowledgement from the AOC.
That's an exciting prospect at the same time, just thinking about it. Yeah. Like, okay, that's a massive challenge, but at the same time, like, you all come together and go, let's crack on and let's do it. Do you have a favourite sport that you covered during the Olympics? Yeah.
I have my favourite sport I covered in terms of the work I got to do on it, which is sport climbing. I think it's an incredibly fascinating sport, and it's changing again for LA, so the format's changed again. So I think the fact it's one of the newer introduced Olympic program sports, and they're finding a way to innovate and make it better along the cycles. They've not just kind of dropped it in and been like, this is our sport, this is how it's going to run. They are continuing over a 4-year cycle to completely change the competition framework. I think that's probably why I like it so much, because it's so dynamic and it changes so much. It's also really cool. Yeah. And I remember for Tokyo, I downloaded the competition rules to try and understand what's...
How big is a document?
Like 45 pages.
Okay.
But I skimmed it. But it was really confusing to me that I'd opened up this document as a comms professional and there was a mathematical formula involved. And for me, that still blows my mind.
That's for scoring?
Yeah, for scoring for bouldering. So the athletes are looking at the different holds or like the different spots to put their hands and how you can basically score. I don't know if it's the highest or the lowest now, I say it out loud, but get the best results.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't like that there's that much math involved.
I want to ask you, Tokyo and Paris, obviously very different Olympics. Tokyo was impacted by COVID, Paris not so much, and felt back to normal life. What was, I guess, the main differences, or what still felt similar, even though the world was in a very different place 3 years apart?
Yeah, I think the similarity is in the work I was delivering on, but also the feeling I got in doing the work. It was the same in Tokyo and for Paris. In Tokyo, I was sitting on my couch in my pajamas, which is a very different vibe to being in the full green and gold out and about in Paris. So it was very similar in terms of the work we delivered and the feeling, I guess, of teamwork, camaraderie, and working on, I guess, this, as you say, the pinnacle of sport, working on this amazing event, knowing that the stuff we write will be seen by a lot of people, but the way we tell the story will potentially shape this athlete's career post the games. And that feeling of it's quite a powerful feeling. So knowing that I was kind of contributing to this really big moment in Australian sporting history, that remained the same, whether or not I was, on the couch pottering away on my laptop or I was standing in a stadium. Yeah,
that makes sense. And from a bonding experience, like I imagine when so many people go away, you're all together, you're all coming together for the greater good and covering the pinnacle of Australian sport. What is that like from a bonding experience when you're all traveling around the other side of the world to all be together?
Yeah, I think from a staff perspective, in terms of like HQ kind of team, it's this really niche thing, and I've only been able to identify it since having worked other international events after Paris. It's this really niche thing of you may not know these people before going in. Sometimes you do just because of the world of sport. But these people kind of see you at a really odd point in your life of you're working fairly long hours most of the time and quite crazy hours, scenario situations. You're going 100 miles an hour. You kind of build this bond, I guess, of we're all there to chip in and get the job done. Even if I'm not an expert in sailing, let me proofread that and I can, potentially help make the story better. It's a real chip in, get the job done kind of feeling. And it was very much that vibe of we're going to get in and we're going to work as hard as we can to deliver a really strong campaign. And then at the end, we can take a reflection point and realize the kind of cool thing we've done.
Yeah.
So you do end up in this kind of event bubble, I guess. And that's translatable, I think, for a lot of people across anything, not just an Olympic Games.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you would have also felt it come finals.
Correct, yeah. And even just the day-to-day of clubland, I think, yeah.
Yeah, you kind of get in this bubble of you don't really realise the scale of what you're doing until you step out of it. So I have a couple of moments across my life where I've not fully clocked, I think, how cool some of the stuff I do is until I come home or I mention it. I mention it to you when I see you at different events.
Or even reflecting now, I imagine as well.
Reflecting now, yeah. You don't fully realise the scale of what you're doing and how much it's impacting people. And I think being able to kind of, I guess, burst the bubble of you've come home from a big event and you're seeing your friends and family who you might not have been as communicative with during an event as they would have liked. And being able to show them photos and different things and explain the experience. But with the Olympics in particular, it's broadcast around the world. It's on socials everywhere. It's not a niche kind of event in Düsseldorf or Berlin. And being able to come home and talking about this with my partner, actually, one of the first things I did apparently when I got in the door was sit down and make him watch the artistic swimming final because it was one of the sports I got to cover.
Yeah.
And I just found the sport itself so interesting and the athletes are so talented. And I just don't think it's necessarily one of the sports people think of when they think of an Olympic Games.
Of course, yeah.
So I put him down on the couch and I basically said, like, we're going to watch this and you're going to enjoy it because it's genuine art. Like, they're wonderful athletes. And I kind of went through then all the different sports I'd covered and made him watch the highlight reels on Channel 9 and I would pause the TV and point to where I was when the stadium had the wide angle. I would point and be like, that's me over there. So I'm here, I'm the little blob. Or, you see the great interviews that the Channel 9 guys do in the mix zone after events. I'd say, like, so I'm standing behind them waiting my turn to interview.
Yeah. I think that's the beauty of working in sport, though. It's that chance where your family buys in, your friends buy in, and you can reflect and like you said with the artistic swimming, I think the Olympics just proved that there's so much sports and talented athletes just because they don't get the broadcast time of most weekends, like in AFL or NRL or like tennis when it comes to town. There's just so many talented people out there that get their chance to shine on the world stage. I think it's great.
And I think to add, I think something that's really you kind of take for granted until you've left the scenario is when you're in an international scenario or a different country and English isn't the first language. My French is not by any means up to scratch to communicate fluently. Being out and about and seeing the green and gold was, this really nice feeling of you could see the green and gold, you could see our guys. It didn't matter if you knew what sport they were from or if you'd ever met them before. You kind of just saw the green and gold. And it was this colour of comfort almost of being like, oh, our people are here.
Yeah.
And, talking about athlete experiences and bonding, I guess, for a better of a term. I had a couple of mix zone interviews in Paris that I still talk about as really fondly because they meant a lot to me as much as I think they might have meant to an athlete. So, for example, the smaller sports that didn't necessarily, as you say, get the primetime coverage in AFL or cricket do, having us out there, I think, meant a lot to them in that they potentially weren't expecting many people. But having someone there really invested in their journey at the Olympics, I think meant a lot to them. And it was one of the first days of competition. I think it was pre-opening ceremony, actually. And it was rugby sevens. And I can safely say, I didn't know much about rugby at the time. I now am much more fluent in it. But I went down to the mix zone at the end of the men's game, and I think the captain and the coach were coming through, and everyone's on them. Like, they've got the microphones, they're asking questions, rightly as they should, because it was a great match and we'd won. But I stood kind of to the side in the mix zone a couple of paces away, and one of these athletes, I'd seen his family out the front of the stadium with a big banner saying like good luck, and it was his name, and they're all wearing the green and gold, and they had the boxing kangaroos.
Yeah.
And I had talked to them, and a lot of them were saying, you know, they'd all flown in from around the world to come and watch him play because they'd never had the chance to see him play. And then to get to play in Stade de France, which is a massive arena, one of the loudest stadiums I've ever been in, was really important for them as a family. And then I was down in the mix zone, and the athlete came through, and the first thing he said when I stopped him, and he saw I was in the green and gold, he goes, "Oh, one of us, this is great." And then I did, you know, I interviewed him and asked him about his family being there, and he's a great guy. It was a really great chat.
Yeah.
And he finished off with something that I love, and you don't often get as a journalist, I think, in those scenarios. And he said, "Thank you so much for coming out. Have a great games." And it's so tiny and so minor in the scale of things. But for him to acknowledge that I'd come out to speak to him, and it was also my games experience, was really powerful.
Yeah, I think even, like you said, the acknowledgement of the smaller athletes, the smaller sports, short-term bias with the Winter Olympics, and some of the coverage some of those people got, and people had probably never heard of them.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden the country just gets wound up in who they are, and there's people like yourself behind the scenes that are dedicating their time to people that you may not have never heard of, but if you don't tell the story, we don't know about the story in Australia. So well done. I want to throw to Tennis Australia now, because that's one of your next roles, publicity lead, April 24 to April 25. Speaking of behind the scenes and cool moments, I know it's something I saw on your LinkedIn when I was just scanning and looking back, and part of a viral moment with Carlos Alcaraz and one of the young boys, I think. Yeah, behind the scenes. I remember seeing the video, now I think about it. But do you want to just firstly tell us about that cool experience and what you played a role in?
I was the participation publicity lead, so I was handling all of, you know, the grassroots stuff, hot shots, cardio tennis, booker court, very much just rackets in hands, people on court, getting them involved in the sport. And I remember sitting in the PR office, and I had seen this thing kind of popping up. We have there's a million TVs up, there's a million angles going, and I'd seen John dance on court, and I had seen that the AO and Tennis Australia guys had posted it, and it was being received really well online. So I had, you know, checked with the relevant stakeholders and the ATP guys who manage Carlos. I said, "There's this thing, it's happening. It seems to be like kind of picking up traction. He seems to really love tennis and Carlos. What can we do? Is there anything we can do for him?" And I had a friend working down on court with the kids on court component, and they were with the family. So we kind of had some very brief phone calls about, can we make this happen? What can we do? And in tennis, you never know how long a match is going to last.
True, yeah.
And I think the match ended a lot sooner than we were expecting. And it was a very quick run over to Rod Laver and check that the family were okay, and then run back with John, holding my hand as we kind of ran through Melbourne Park to get to the point where the athletes come out from change rooms for their press conferences. And I had come at it with the intention of, this kid loves tennis. I just wanted to give him a really great experience. So I just wanted to kind of show, you know, by participating in hot shots and the grassroots programs, you can get really cool experiences. And in my mind, that's all it was. And then credit to Carlos and John. But credit to Carlos for just being such a great guy that he remembered his name from the get-go, was asking tons of questions, was really involved. And even during the press conference, he saw John kind of sitting at the front, and he just like looked over and like gave him this big smile and was really happy about having, you know, a big fan there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had approached that completely as, this could be a really nice moment for this kid and his family. And it kind of just picked up from there.
Who was covering that? Did you organise someone to video this, or someone has just organically done it? Yeah.
I had sent a message to one of the Tennis Australia employees who works in the socials, basically saying, hey, this clip's going around. I've arranged for John to be there and watch Carlos's press conference.
Yeah.
And he ran over. So he came over and we were all there waiting kind of for Carlos to come out of the lift and see John and have this really nice moment. But I didn't anticipate it was going to blow up as much as it did, which is potentially why I didn't ask or tell broadcast or anyone else. Because as I said, I'd approached it as this is going to be a great moment for this kid to experience.
And something more behind the scenes that'll be lovely and not get as much traction. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I'd come at it. And obviously that's not how it ended up, and it did go quite viral. But I guess that because I'd approached it in such this is a great moment, this is really genuine, this is raw. I wasn't necessarily doing it for the cameras. I was more doing it for the story that we could potentially share and tell after, and to give John a really great experience. It's why I'm trying so desperately to hide in the corner of all of the video, but I'm just slightly popping out because it's a corridor. There's not a ton of places to hide.
Yeah.
But that moment itself was really, really fun and really funny to me, in that I have friends who live in London, the US, and they knew I worked in sport, but they were sending me this video not realizing I'm standing in the background. And to have that moment of, they're like, oh my gosh, did you see this? Like, this is so cute. Like, and for me to respond, I'm like, yeah, I know I'm the one in the back. And when they realized, it was this really nice moment to have people who I potentially hadn't spoken to in a long time kind of reach out because they knew I was working at tennis.
Yeah.
And say like, oh my gosh, have you met John? Like, this is really cute kind of thing. And I had to tell them like, oh yeah, I'm with him.
Is that one of your most rewarding experiences in your career?
It's definitely up there as really, really rewarding. Probably I'm going to put like top 2 or 3, definitely. Yeah. I think for me, the most rewarding experiences are very much those moments of you don't anticipate they're going to be something massive, but they do just turn out that way because they are raw and real, and that's what people want to see these days.
And like you said at the start, the grassroots and the game development, that's where it all starts, and look at the impact there. Yeah. I want to flip over to Europe again. You were deputy venue media manager, for the 2025 FISU, what does that stand for?
Federation Internationale.
I thought it might have been something like that.
It's definitely not.
Well, the 2025 World University Games in Berlin. This is another sort of random one, and I want to just understand, how does the role come about to get back to Germany and then speak to that experience as well?
Yeah, I've unintentionally done a lot of events in Germany. Don't know how. It's just kind of happening that way. I, at the time, I'd finished up my contract, which was a maternity cover at Tennis Australia, and I was taking a bit of a break because I just needed it. I'd done Paris straight through to AO without taking time off, which in retrospect wasn't the smartest thing. So I was a bit burnt out, and I did just kind of need time to recover. And I had taken time off, and we were planning to be in Europe. We're planning to be in Europe for quite a while, and then life happens. We just didn't end up getting there at the time we thought we would, but I had already reached out to someone I knew was based in Europe, and someone I'd worked on Tokyo with. So because of the remote nature of Tokyo, she was the media liaison officer for a couple of the sports I was working on, and I was in Australia. So we had been already communicating in that way, and I'd seen her. She also worked in Invictus Games, so I'd seen her there, and we'd kind of just like been LinkedIn friends, just kind of, cheering each other on and hyping each other up in the comments. Yeah. And
I feel like that's the beauty of tournament contract roles too.
Yeah.
Is that those long-term connections. And
there's so many people that I know I could message now should the opportunity come up.
Yeah.
But essentially I'd sent her a message saying like, hey, I'm around if anything pops up. And I think they'd had someone drop out. It was fairly quick. It was a fairly quick turnaround. They'd had someone drop out from being a deputy venue media manager in Berlin because the Uni Games were kind of all over Germany. And so Berlin was a satellite city. So there was only volleyball and swimming Yes, there was only volleyball and swimming taking place, and diving. Sorry, there were 3: volleyball, swimming, diving taking place in Berlin, whereas everything else was elsewhere in the country. So she had messaged me basically saying, hey, this opportunity's popped up. Are you free these dates? Kind of thing. Does this work for you? Can you get here? And I jumped at the opportunity because I'm really vocal about my goal, but my goal is to work 1 international event a year. So I'm really vocal about that. And in my mind, I was like, great, this is it. So I immediately said yes, kind of thing. And just due to our personal circumstances at the time, we were meant to be in London, but as I said, just it didn't work out that way. Mm-hmm. So it was something I don't typically do in freelance roles, which is pay for my own flights. And I think that's also something people don't fully think about when you talk about international work. A lot of companies aren't willing to fork out the, $1,500, $2,000 it is to get an Australian employee to Europe. Whereas I had to go for a number of reasons. I had to be in Europe around that time. So I was already there, which worked out great.
Yeah.
But it was definitely a financial hit before it was a return moment. So I think being, once again, very privileged to be in the position I was in and be able to do that, but to cop a bit of a financial hit when I knew it was going to come back. And the way that I'd approached it was, even if it doesn't come back financially, getting to say I've done a World Uni Games in a deputy manager role and getting to work in a different environment, again, was kind of worth more to me than financial remuneration.
Yeah, I understand. And what was probably the biggest takeaway from, did that feel like a more senior role as well and a bit more independent from what I was reading?
It really did. So there were 4 volleyball venues around Berlin and we were all stationed at different ones. Mine was a non-broadcast venue. So it was a little bit less pressure to begin with, which was great. But it was definitely more senior and I was kind of given a lot more autonomy to go in, get the operations sorted, set up everything, the media workroom, make sure you've got all the flyers and everything printed out with the schedule, who's playing, all those kind of stuff, making sure the photographers were abiding by the rules, everyone was wearing their bibs, the stock standard stuff that comes with a media operations kind of role. Yeah. But yeah, I was really given a lot of autonomy to go and make it my own kind of thing, which was really empowering, but also was really nice. I love operations roles from time to time because I call them my brain switch off time. Everyone has an opinion on social media, your writing. It's a highly criticized space. Everyone will have an opinion and everyone gets to see it. Operations to me is so straightforward. It is black and white. We do this because of this and this will work because of X, Y, Z. So I kind of call it my brain switch off time. So I really, really enjoyed it. And
following that, you're now in How Good Is Permi Life, like you said before, and proudly wearing the Victorian Institute of Sport. So you're currently the public affairs and marketing manager there. Tell us how that role comes about and what does it look like in and out of, I guess, main competition time too?
Yeah, the organisation had just gone through a bit of a restructure in line with gearing up basically for LA 2028, French Alps 2030, Brisbane 2032. And my role had kind of come about because previously the organisation had been more internal kind of focused. It didn't necessarily have such a public-facing perception or public-facing goal, I guess, to raise awareness. So my role kind of shifted from the previous position, which was more comms marketing focused, to being public affairs and a bit more brand aware.
Yeah.
So that is kind of how the role itself came about. Very funny. And during this process of getting recruited for the VIS, I took the contract to go to Germany because you don't always hear back from jobs.
Of course.
And I've definitely gone through interviews where I've never heard. I've had phone screenings, I've had first, I've had seconds, and then you just don't hear anything. Whereas the VIS had been highly communicative. So I will say that was really helpful. But between my first and second interview, I had taken a job in Berlin and basically said, hey, I'm going to go to Berlin. It's
can I interview from Berlin?
Kind of non-negotiable.
The contract was only a month though, right?
Yeah, it was a short term. Yeah, it wasn't long. But yeah, and they were incredible about that. And for me, when you're having worked across so many different organizations and industries, for me, when I go in an interview, yes, it's about selling myself and showing my skill set. But for me, the biggest piece is culture. And as I say, being a place I really want to spend, spending, let's be real, it's more 45 hours plus of your life doing the work or being around these people or being in that environment. If I don't enjoy it, I'm going to be miserable, which in turn will make everyone in my life miserable.
That's completely fair, yeah.
So,
and during this process too, so Dan, I want to get his name right, Dan Simons or Simmons? I'm sorry, Dan. I should have double checked. But Dan's obviously a great friend of the show, great friend of Rube's, been on the podcast, massive advocate for our program, and obviously to see that you're now connected with him is fantastic. And I suppose the other thing I wanted to ask you with this job is you mentioned that there's the Com Games on the horizon this year, which is up in Scotland. Obviously, we would have loved it to be in Melbourne. But from your role, you've told me you're going to head over as well. Is that correct?
I am, yeah. So similar thing to Paris, I applied independently to my role at the VIS to be a part of the Glasgow HQ team. And very small cohort because there's only 10 sports going over now as part of a modified format. But same kind of thing. I applied. Thankfully, it was people I had worked with before, so they knew my skill set and they knew necessarily what I could do more than what I could put on paper. Because as we talk about in the world of PR, media, content, it's not always stuff you can actually put on paper, and it's not always stuff you can talk about freely. So having a bit of an insight into the work I have done previously and stuff I had delivered upon, I think definitely was beneficial.
Yeah.
But yeah, same kind of thing. Went through the recruitment process as a part of like an expression of interest, interviewed, and then fairly quick turnaround got the call saying basically like, yeah, we'd love to have you. Go Glasgow. And
amazing.
Once again, credit to the VIS for being so supportive of me taking roles that take me out of the country. I had checked ahead of time, obviously, like, hey, is it cool if I apply for this? It might mean that I'm not doing my VIS work during one of the most crucial times for the VIS, which is an international event to raise our profile and tell the stories of our athletes. And credit to Dan and our CEO, Nicole, I told them and there wasn't a second question in their mind. They were like, what a great opportunity. Go for it.
Yeah, amazing. So, that's great to have the support from them as well. And it ticks off your international event a year, right?
I know. Just have to get rugby now for 2027. I think we're sorted.
Yes, I was going to say what's on the card next year, but rugby would be a great one, obviously in Australia. So look out for that one. Now, I want to just finish career-wise around some general PR and media questions for those that are interested and fascinated as well. So with all the opportunities you've been through, how do you measure success in this type of work?
It's a really difficult one because, as I said, PR is a lot of behind the scenes and it's a lot of shaping audience perceptions and feelings and opinions. And that's sometimes really hard to put into a fact or a figure or kind of hard data. So from that component, it's quite difficult sometimes to measure success for an organization versus your own perception of what individual success is for a campaign. For the content marketing side of things, data analytics is wonderful and can tell me very easily if what I'm doing is working. And for me, I pay a lot of attention to the data analytics of what are people engaging with, what are they not engaging with, is there a way we could have made this better? And for me, back to our point around paying attention to the grassroots, something I pay a lot of attention to is the Ausplay data when it comes out, because that gives me a pretty decent overview of what's happening in participation across the country. And knowing, for an example, hey, tennis is most participated in this state by this cohort, by this demographic, I can shape my stories and I can shape the work I'm doing to specifically appeal to a target market I know is already actively engaged in the sport or might be interested in finding out more. Mm-hmm. So that's always a great way to set yourself up for success. But also you can then measure the success in that, hey, there was X 100,000 people participated over this time period, and then in the next year's data you can see, hey, there was a spike in 150,000 people participated. Whether or not you can accredit that extra number to your PR work stands to be up for debate, but you can only do so much to push people to participate in sport, and that's one of the ways I think that you can do it.
Yeah, that's understandable. And biggest challenges that you think are facing people in sports PR now that are already in the industry or maybe people that are coming through as well?
Yeah, I think a lot of people will probably have a similar answer. The biggest issue, it's both a positive and a negative, is AI. I think that AI definitely has a place in the everyday workplace now. It's being used across so many different organizations and so many different roles and industries to optimize and speed up very admin heavy tasks. And then from a high performance component, I'm not as across it as the PR component, but I know there's a real benefit there for a lot of things. But to me, the fact that AI exists and social media is such a powerhouse now, misinformation can spread so quickly, and it's really hard sometimes to then rein it back in and fact check, because you've got a case in point, poor Garmin and Strava went through an April Fool's Day prank where it was said that Garmin bought Strava or vice versa, and I fell for a hook, line and sinker, not realizing it was April Fool's. And so did a lot of people I know, in that even the other day we were having coffee and with a bunch of friends we run with, and they were like, oh, that's not real. You know, it's really hard.
I didn't actually hear about that.
Yeah, it's really hard. How do you, as a organization or as a company, when social media is on every second of every day and people have the ability to create images and AI and do all this stuff, how are you meant to protect your organization's reputation when misinformation can spread so quickly?
Yeah, it's probably something I don't realize enough. And in your world, that's a big thing. I see it in soccer as well. Like, being a big fan, it's like, oh, people reporting this transfer or this has happened. And it's like, nah, someone's just saying that. It makes you think it. So how do you find new and unique stories to pitch in a crowded media landscape?
I think, to my point about data, I look at what would succeed typically, like where is there a demand already for certain sports or certain audiences. For me, I think my approach to it is I spend more time looking at not traditional sports media. There's a place absolutely for your broadcast rights holders and your print media and your radio, but I spend more time looking at, I guess, more editorial magazines, podcast, because I do think new media is on the rise and it's being underutilized by high performance sport. I think it's being underutilized by a lot of organizations, not just sport. But I mean, to its credit, I think there's some insane stat around how many people listen to podcasts versus how many people listen to radio. And there's numbers there to back up that thinking and that strategy. But for me, I one, look at new media, but I also think about the story that I'm trying to sell or the story I'm pitching. And I guess an example of this is when it's an athlete story. An athlete story is wonderful, it's powerful, and it will 98% of the time do the job of they've had this happen, they're coming back from injury, they're overcoming adversity, they're gearing up for their first games debut. That stuff's really powerful and will always have its place, and I put a lot of value in that. But at the same time, these athletes are doing, most of them, at least at the VIS, are studying and doing, full-time careers on top of this, trying to become an athlete. So for me, I try and look at the story more holistically. In one of our athletes is studying medicine at this point. Like, how on earth? I don't know how you can study medicine and still compete and train as an elite athlete at a full-time level. There's an athlete I know who's working as a primary school teacher. I can barely get myself out of bed in time. How on earth do you manage to do like all of this stuff? So for me, I look at the story of the person I'm pitching just as much as the publication I'm pitching to.
Yeah. Can you share a time you had to manage a client through a crisis or a scandal, and like what was the challenge and outcome from that?
I will say this one was very much more credit to my CEO and someone within my team at the VIS. She works in community programs, Tess Lloyd, wonderful, wonderful human and an Olympian. We had Dean Hewitt, the curler, not qualify for curling for Milano Cortina when it was kind of anticipated that they would. They were coming in quite highly ranked in the world. Life happens, sport is sport. It just didn't work out that way. And having to manage or be a part of, I guess, the messaging around, yes, we were planning on participating in curling for Milano Cortina, but we didn't. So how do you navigate that storyline whilst being really respectful of the athletes' mental health and well-being and keeping them in the sport? Because I think there's a lot of athletes who potentially have really bad injuries or have really bad setbacks and just call it. Yeah. And that's their choice. They're well within their right to do that. But there was a real push basically the moment it kind of happened, because we were watching it in the lunch area at the VIS. It was up on the big screen. You know, we're all around kind of watching the final qualifications. And it kind of happened. And probably within 5 or 6 hours, there was a plan in place to keep him involved in sport. And if he wanted to, be involved in the community programs that we deliver. So go out to schools, talk to kids about what it means to be a Winter Olympian, talk about how do you come back from something like that. So I think managing that from a PR, media, stakeholder kind of point of view, but also from an athlete wellbeing point of view, I think the athlete wellbeing component just can't be missed. Or one, I think you're going to do a lot of damage to someone's psyche and a lot of damage potentially to their reputation if you're pushing them in a way that they're not ready to be pushed in and that they're not comfortable in. I think it gives a disingenuous story, and you can tell when people are saying the company line or when people are doing something they're not 100% sure about. So for the VIS, having Nicole's backing and having Tess really take the lead and make sure, working in with Dean's performance support staff, that he was really happy to still be involved in the Winter Games in some capacity. I think that's probably the closest I can share about how to navigate a crisis.
Yeah, no, I think it's great how you can flip the script on a situation like that and so quickly. And I respect and acknowledge that there will be so many stories that you can't share. And
save that for the tell-all.
Yeah, but that's the beauty of being in sport too. Is someone could be in a position like you, and yes, it's confidential and you can't say much, but it's also probably cool that you know about all these things that some people don't, I imagine. Yeah. And you know, lawyers are the same. We had Chris Grant on from the Grand Prix recently, and I know there's things that he can't say too, and that's just life and that's work, so that's okay. And the last one on the holistic PR comms, how do you build trust and relationships with all the relevant stakeholders in this world?
I think you've experienced this with me actually at Western, so it's very interesting to have the conversation now years later. For me, as I said, like being a contractor, you have to go in and be able to identify your surroundings really quickly. Who's who in the game, who makes the calls, what personalities to kind of watch for. Coming into Western United as a mat cover and also coming into a team sport, and I'd never necessarily worked in a team sport of that kind, being able to, identify, you've got coach, general manager, CEO, key kind of players, the bigger names. Once again, not knowing football coming in kind of helped me out because it meant that everyone was of equal value to me when I started talking to the different male and female players. And it's something I have done throughout my career and I will continue to do, is I always share a lot about myself. I'm mindful of who I'm talking to and the scenarios I'm in, but I often will introduce myself, try and get an understanding of who they are as a person, but I'll also try and find a point of empathy or commonality and give people kind of an idea of who I am. I'm not just the media manager. I don't want them to be scared when they get a phone call from me.
For sure.
Or, walk away from me on the pitch at halftime because I need them to do broadcast. I want them to see me as a safe kind of space and someone who's got their back. So for me, being able to, talk fairly openly about the stuff I can and want to, which for me is my family, my partner, my life, it helps shape their perception of me as a human, not just this kind of corporate worker coming in to, get the scandal or fight a story or whatever like that. I think being able to give them an idea that I'm a human too. I have similar experiences. A lot of the people, a lot of the players that we've worked with, they were, young and dating and buying houses and going through the kind of stuff we went through. So being able to, talk about that and go through a similar journey. But at the same time, you had some of the older guys who were closer to retirement and had their family and had their kids, being able to talk about that and share kind of I had an experience with my niece or XYZ. I think finding a commonality and making the perception of yourself more open and trustworthy is kind of how you build up those relationships a little bit quicker.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice, and no doubt is it important in your role, but I think it's important for anyone, and that just allows you to all work collaboratively as best you can. So well done with that. I want to talk mentors as well. I know you mentioned you've had a few just in these conversations here, but who have been some of the biggest influences or mentors in your career, and what advice have they given you along the way?
I don't know if they realise that they're my mentors.
That's
or
all right.
Just people I have worked with over a number of different events and look up to. Or
I would say the same thing. So yeah.
They've definitely influenced, I guess, my approach and my view of the world. I had some incredible people I worked with at swimming when I first started. Once again, I do think they probably don't realize it, but as I have said, like at the time, I just moved from Perth. I didn't know anyone in Melbourne. I never had a full-time job before. And these kind of two women really stepped up and they made sure that I understood kind of the protocol of things or how things are done, or they were a sounding board, or they could help me when, you know, I was dealing with adult things that I'd never had to deal with by myself before. So having them in my life, and I still talk to them to this day, I still have them very heavily involved in my life, which is wonderful. Having them be a huge guiding light, I think, is really important. They had different backgrounds. One of them had been in sport for a long time in commercial. The other had been more in the participation kind of space. So I still use them as sounding boards when I have to make big decisions around what jobs to take and what contracts to say no to and when to draw the line. And then I think the other one, there's another two I think that are really important to have in your circle when you're trying to build up that network or like guidance support system, is to find someone who is technically a competitor in that they're going for the same jobs as you. They are, you know, it just happens in sport. And
yeah, I know Ruben speaks a lot about it as the sparring partner is the reference.
Yeah.
And my example is a good friend of mine, Brent Hubber, and he's at the AFL. We both chased partnerships roles out of uni. And again, going for the exact same role. So I think it's really good because it pushes each other to be the best person you can be.
Yeah, and I think it's also really great when you are in that kind of industry, you can bounce ideas off each other, or, you know, say like, hey, you know, even journalist contacts, you know, having someone who's really happy and open to share, you know, oh, I've got a guy at 9 or I've got a guy at AAP kind of thing. When sometimes, you know, much like in internal NSO sport media, papers change all the time, journalists move all the time. So sometimes it can be hard to keep up. And having someone that you can kind of really easily talk to about that stuff, and they understand exactly what you're talking about, whereas trying to explain to friends who don't necessarily understand a high performance system what's going on can get a little less than helpful. But I think the one final one, and I do want to give her a proper shout out because she's been just incredible, is one of our chief of staffs from Paris, Katrina Dixon, who's just a powerhouse of a professional. And she's done some incredible things, and she has given me some of the best advice probably in the last 3 or 4 years about how to steer my career to get where I want to be, but also to like in helping me get roles in a variety of places. You know, the VIS for one, she was very helpful in helping me prepare for that. But she did give me a piece of advice that I still try and remember during the busy times, which is, you know, sport will always be there. Your career, you can come back to, and you can pivot, and you can rebuild yourself at any point in your life. For me, it was my partner at the time. Sorry, to be clear, he's still my partner. He's very much he's my fiance now, very much still together. But at the scenario I'm discussing, she kind of said, you know, don't put him on the back burner and don't put your life on the back burner because a cool opportunity has come up that might, you know, at the time I was in between two kind of offers, and one would have seen me traveling a lot more, probably much more back to like a Western United kind of schedule of matches and international competitions and a lot of stuff like that. So I definitely would have traveled a lot more, which was a big tick for me. But I also would have spent a lot of time away from my partner, who is one of my biggest advocates and support systems. So making the call to go more permanent, but also to chase something with a little bit more stability and an environment that I already had felt really comfortable in prior to even being hired. Her advice of, you know, make sure you're filling that cup as well. You can always come back and take another crack at things was really, really helpful.
Lovely advice from a work-life balance. So
yeah.
Very good. These are a bit more hypothetical ones and also reflective. But if you had to go back in time and someone said, I'll give you $1 million if you can land a job in sports media or PR in the next 30 days, what's your approach?
LinkedIn. Don't undervalue it. Don't see it as a cringe tool, which it can kind of be perceived as a bit boasty, I guess. The stuff we do is incredibly cool. Show us that you are, like, show the people in my roles and show, you know, hiring managers, people across the industry, show them that you're multi-talented and you're skilled. And that can be a number of things of, you know, posting or reposting really successful stuff that other clubs or organizations are doing and adding your thoughts or your take on how you might have approached it differently, or you might, you know, this is great because of X, Y, Z. As I say, in the world of AI, people want to know, I want to know your thoughts. I want to know what you're thinking. I don't want to know what the robot's telling me you think. So I would say get on LinkedIn, post, play in those spaces. For me, when I was freelancing, and this is probably really helpful for someone, find the people who are hiring managers, workforce managers at major international events or whatever industry you're chasing. Find them on LinkedIn, follow them, engage in their comments, message them when you connect. You know, even if it's to tag a friend to say, hey, did you see this kind of thing? That stuff has been really helpful for me. So that's probably how I'd approach it, because I'd love $1 million.
Yeah, and we love LinkedIn at SportsGrad. So I love that you would use LinkedIn as well. Biggest pinch me moment? And there's probably a pit, but biggest one in sport?
It's probably two. Now I have actually had time to sit and reflect. One is a pure happenstance moment of when I was at the Invictus Games. It was the wheelchair basketball match between Ukraine and Australia, and I was doing my job. So I'm running around the court, getting content, like getting all the angles. I'm squatting, I'm leaning over, I'm doing anything to get a really cool shot. And just at that exact time that I sat down to whip my phone out and film the Aussie team having like a huddle and a bit of a team moment, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle walked past. And so the photographers are going crazy, absolutely insane. And I am now in the background of, I think, like the Sun or the Daily Telegraph photos, looking really happy that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are standing in front of me because my phone is up and I'm smiling. But I was really just trying to get the content for the Australian team. But I just look like the biggest fans of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry.
I thought when you were saying Invictus Games, I'm like, it's going to be Prince Harry, surely.
Yeah.
And then sure
There's that. And then I think on probably a more personal one is rugby sevens at the Paris 2024 Games. I didn't know I was going to be covering it at the time. I didn't know I was going to be on rugby. My brother-in-law, who was in London, had flown over to the games, very like last minute kind of thing. And he had managed to get tickets. And, you know, I was in event mode, so I was uncommunicative. I was not responding on Instagram or any kind of messaging platform to anyone that wasn't my chief of staff or people within the bubble. And it just so happened and turned out that he'd managed to score tickets to the Aussie game at Stade de France for one of the days. And this is a very blurry photo that exists with a little circle around it of me in the media tribune at Stade de France working. And I looked quite cranky, to be fair, but I think I was just really focused.
Yeah.
But it was this really awesome moment of, I was in, you know, doing what I love in the pinnacle of sport, and to have someone who I know loves and supports me in the stands in some capacity. He was there for the rugby, but it was also really nice to have someone see me do what I get to do in, you know, on the biggest sporting stage in the world. Because so much of what we do when we do go overseas, as I said, is completely unseen to our friends, family, partners. So I had my partner in Melbourne watching rugby sevens because he knew I was covering it. And then I had my brother-in-law who was in the stands watching the rugby and having a great time, but also getting to see me run back and forth from the mix zone to the media tribune for a couple of matches and kind of do my job. So having him in the stands and having that moment was really, it's probably not as good a pinch me moment as Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. But for me,
super special.
Yeah, for me it was incredibly special in that I don't know if I'll get that experience or that chance again to have, you know, someone in the stands supporting me like that.
Definitely. What do you think life would look like if you didn't pursue your career in sport?
Oh my gosh. I definitely would have ended up doing something unconventional, I think. Probably theatre, arts, music, live events.
Yeah.
Because I just can't sit still.
And still the buzz of what those industries bring. Yeah,
very much so. And it's talk about why I want to work in sport. It's the passion and the power and the camaraderie and that kind of stuff that you can only kind of get in those industries.
Yeah. Now we have our question from our last guest, Rachel Lynch, who actually used to be at the VIS as well for a couple of years, just before you were there. And ex-hockey-roo. What was the biggest takeaway from one of your family members that's influenced your career in sport?
I think for me, it was actually from my grandpa. So he spent basically his entire life volunteering with surf life saving. So, and he was, down at the beach more than I think he should have been without sunscreen. But he played some role, I know, in helping set up the competition framework for surf life saving. I'm not 100% certain on what, but he's actually been inducted into the Surf Life Saving Australia Hall of Fame. No, not Hall of Fame. Life members. He's on the life members list for his volunteering and his contributions. And that's a volunteer position. Like, he could have spent time with, his family. He could have been doing anything else. He was, giving up his hours to go build out this framework and contribute to other people enjoying the beach and being safe, and surf life saving, which is now much more of an organised sport than it would have been at the time. And his approach to that and the way he talked about those experiences, that's probably why I love the grassroots as much as I do, or I see the value in it, is his approach to giving up his time. I don't think a lot of people fully clock how many hours it goes into running a grassroots program or a platform like that. So for me, his approach and his work ethic towards that's definitely shaped how I approach things now.
Yeah, fantastic backstory. And for you, what's the one question you would like to leave our next guest?
I want to know, in 10 years' time, what do you think sport will have lost? So I think we talk about, AI and all these amazing innovations and advancement. What's one fundamental thing you think will have changed?
Love it. I look forward to hearing what the answer is. Well, thank you again for your time today, Sarah. It's been great to catch up, hearing about a wealth and incredible amount of stories in the world of PR and comms, and also just general sport life experience. So plenty of valuable advice and takeaways. So, yeah, just really appreciate your time. And if we don't see each other, good luck at the Com Games.
Thanks.